Hello and welcome to PSD Tats Plus. My name is Martin Perhiniak, and in this video I'm going to introduce you to the curves adjustment. So first of all, to be able to use an adjustment non-destructively, always use the adjustments panel. So from the image adjustments you can use them destructively, and from the adjustments panel you can use them as layers. And that's what I'm going to do. Choose the curves adjustment from here, and as you can see, it's now added as a layer which has already a mask, and it has opacity and even blend mode. So that makes it very flexible to work with. I made my panel a little bit bigger, and you can also see that whenever you choose an adjustment layer, you are actually now in the properties panel. So once we choose it, we switch from adjustments to properties. And these two panels work hand in hand, so it's good to keep them roughly in the same area in your workspace. First glance at the adjustment, there are a lot of things here. We have a histogram, we have a diagonal line, we have white and black points, we have 3 eyedroppers, we have a hand, we have channels, we have presets, we have an automatic feature, we have a pencil, and we also have input, output, and a couple of icons at the bottom, plus we have a menu as well. So it's quite complex, and in this tutorial, as I promised, I will go through everything. So I will try to clarify how to work with this adjustment and how can you make the most of it. So good news first of all is that you can experiment with it very easily because you can always reset it. So if I make a big change, let's just say I drag the curve up, and that you can already see it increases the brightness of the image. We can always set this back by clicking on the reset icon here at the bottom. So that will reset it. And while we are here at the bottom, let's learn the other icons here as well. If I increase the brightness and then maybe I decrease the brightness, I can see the previous adjustment by clicking on this eye icon here. While I press it, I can see how it looked before and after. So for example, now if I select the background layer and select the curves, and I make a big change again, now if I hold it down, it won't show the original image, but it will show the previous adjustment, which was that very dark version. So when I let go, I can see after, before, after. So it's a previous adjustment and the new adjustment, the comparison between them two. And you can also use a keyboard shortcut for this. You can use the backslash. So while you are holding that down, you will see the previous. When you let go, you will see after. Let me reset the adjustment and show you the other icons. This one is simply to turn it off and on, the adjustment layer. The one on the right is to delete it, and the one on the left is to create a clipping. When you clip an adjustment to a layer, it will only affect that selected layer beneath it. So if you have several layers in your layers panel, you won't affect anything else, only the layer directly below the adjustment layer. So that's also useful. You can always turn it on and off here. So these are the icons at the bottom. But before we go through all the other options, let me give you a brief introduction. So what is curves adjustment layer is really good for? We can use it for several things, but mainly it's useful to adjust the tones. So make the image locally brighter or darker, and it's also good for color correction. So essentially, this is what we use these curves for, but you will see a lot of techniques here that you can include in your workflow. So first of all, you already saw that in an RGB image, whenever you drag the curve up, that will increase the brightness. But why is it different from using other adjustment layers? When shifting a point in the curves adjustment, every other brightness level along the line is also adjusted gradually. So that's what you see here. And the histogram, if you are not familiar with the histogram, has the shadows on the left, midtones in the middle, and highlights on the right. So we have highlights here, midtones, and shadows. You can see that little slider here at the bottom shows that very well. So the darkest point is on the left, that's the black point of the image, and the brightest point is on the right, that's the white point of the image. Now between these two, in the middle somewhere, we have the midtones, the middle values, and in this image it would be probably somewhere these in the middle, they are more midtones, or these rocks here in the foreground, and probably even the sky would fall in the midtones area, while these darker parts of the mountains would be the shadows. Anything in shadow here as well would fall in the shadows area, and highlights would be probably the clouds and the snowy mountain peaks. So wherever you see higher values in the histogram, that shows that there are a lot of color information for that specific tones, like shades of your image. So if I want to increase the brightness of the global or overall image, I can drag the curve up, but it will gradually increase the brightness. It won't increase on the shadows and the highlights as much as it will increase on the midtones. And that is a very useful way of working with images, because it will protect your image from being completely overexposed on like the highlights or on the shadows. So it tries to avoid clipping in the image, and that's a great feature. If you want to see clipping, by the way, you can use these sliders at the bottom. By holding down Alt, you can drag the shadow or the black point in the image, and then it will show you where clipping starts to appear in the image. If I drag it back, we will set it back to normal, and we can do the same, show highlight clipping, by dragging the point on the right as well. If you know how to work with the levels adjustment, you know that whenever you want to increase the contrast of an image, you should always avoid empty areas in your histogram. There is an icon here which can refresh the histogram, which is quite useful. And now we can tell that yes, this part here on the right is almost empty. On the left, it's not empty, so I won't move my black point, but the white point could be adjusted to the histogram. And if I show it before and after, I can turn this adjustment layer off and on again. You can see that it increased already the brightness, the overall brightness of the image by resetting the white point. And by holding down Alt, we can tell that only a couple of parts of the image started to be clipped. So that little part here in the cloud, but that is a sacrifice we can make. But that's a consideration, so you don't have to, but you can. And that's why it's really good. You can check the clipping with holding down Alt. So we already did a change here. We set the white point closer to the histogram, so increase the brightness, and we also moved the curve up, which also increased the overall brightness of the image. If you are in CMYK mode, the curves would behave completely the opposite way. You would need to drag the curve up to darken the image and drag it down to brighten. But here in RGB mode, it's dragging up to increase the brightness and dragging down to decrease the brightness. Once again, it gives you a visual clue, because here on the left we have the output values. So you can see bottom is input, that is like before, you can think of it, and this is the output, which is like after. So before and after values. So like this value here in the middle, we move it up. So that value there moves up, then it turns this bright. So it was a midtone and now it's much brighter. A whole quarter, you can see that little grid can help us to tell, a whole quarter of tonal value brighter. So it was originally 2 blocks, now it's 3 blocks away from the dark point or black point. Once we put a point on the curve, we can always move it around, but we can also drag it outside of the whole curves adjustment to get rid of it. The reason why we can do that is because you can put as many points as you want on the curves. So you can click and drag and then click and drag to create another point, and so on and so forth. Why do we need these several points? we need them because then we can do really local adjustments. So for example, if I want to increase the brightness of the shadows while keeping the highlights the same as they were, I can do an effect like this. That will really reduce the contrast in the image, but it will equalize the tonal values, so it will brighten the shadows and darken the highlights. This is a so-called S-curve, but the S-curve is really when you use it the opposite way, darken the shadows and brighten the highlights. Now, because this image is already quite dark, we can create an S-curve more like this, where we have the shadows also a little bit brighter, but the highlights even brighter, or maybe the midtones brighter, something like that. Let's have a look at before and after. It looks already much better, but maybe in this case, I would also add a little bit brightness on the shadows and reduce the brightness on the highlights. So the S-curve is good when you need to increase the contrast, but this image is already quite high in contrast, so I just needed to balance out a bit the brightness. So again, let's have a look at before and after. That looks quite good already. We can always play around with the black point just to add a little bit more contrast in it, and maybe increase the shadows, the brightness of the shadows. Okay, let's have a look at before and after. It starts to look better than before, but now we also have to color correct this image. And for color correction, you can use several ways here in the curves adjustment. You can either use the eyedropper tools, or you can also do it manually. If you select channels, and you can use keyboard shortcuts for that as well, Alt-2 is the composite RGB channel, 3, 4, and 5 would be the channels separately. So you can use those keyboard shortcuts to quickly switch between them. And whenever you select a channel, let's just say blue channel, and drag the blue channel down, that will mean we reduce the intensity of that color channel in the image. I feel like we need a little bit more red in the image, so I can click on the red and drag it up. And you can already see it looks much better. And I did this completely manually. But I can decide to get rid of these changes, so I can just simply drag this point off from the red channel and do the same on the blue channel and go back to RGB and use one of these eyedropper tools, and let's see what Photoshop can do automatically. If I select the gray eyedropper tool, that will set the gray point for the image. So this one, for example, can be used for as a gray point. That should be a neutral gray. And once I clicked on it, the whole image is now automatically color corrected. But in the curves, you can see exactly what Photoshop did. Here, this 3 channels separately are represented with these colors. And you can see that green stayed in the middle, blue went down a bit, and red came up. Photoshop did almost exactly the same what I did, so increased the amount of red colors in the image and decreased the amount of blue colors in the image. So you can use the gray or the white or the black eyedropper tools. Always better to use the gray point because there's more information in that area. But you can also change the sampling point to a higher sampling point to maybe be a bit more accurate with your sampling. There's another tool here which is called on-image adjustment tool, this hand tool. Once that is selected, whenever I hover over an area of the image, I can see where that part falls on the curve or on the histogram. So I can tell that these values are very dark, while these values are much brighter, and this cloud here is almost already clipped, so it's almost on the right side of the histogram completely. So that's a good way to check the information on the image or these areas on the image. But you can also click on a part of the image, like click on this shadow part and drag it up, will increase the brightness, drag it down will decrease the brightness on that selected part. So you can always play around with these values. Like we can click on the sky and drag it down to make it darker. So let's have a look at before and after. Together with the manual adjustments and also the automatic adjustments, we managed to color correct the image and also improve the exposure of the image. And if we take a lot of photos of the same area, we can save a setting as a preset, so it can be used on another image easily. You can do that from the preset options. Here you can see already a couple of presets which come with Photoshop, but from the menu, the panel menu, you can choose Save Curves Preset. The same way you can also load presets, but it's good to know that whenever you use an adjustment layer, you can always just simply drag and drop it onto another image. That way you simply copied the whole adjustment onto the other image as well. It's also good to know that you can use blend modes with adjustments. So what can we use with a curves adjustment layer? You can change it to luminosity, which will only affect the exposure but not the colors of the image. In some cases that's useful, and as you can see here now, we only changed brightness or the exposure of the image with this blend mode, but the colors are not affected. So luminosity is an interesting one. And screen can be good as well whenever you have dark images, where you want to make sure that you don't darken the image, you only brighten the values in the image. But in this case, I'm going to stick with the normal blend mode. And I just wanted to make sure you know that you can also use masking. For example, in this case, I can use my brush tool, increase its size, maybe set it a little bit more soft on the edges, using Ctrl, Alt and click and drag up and down with the brush tool. I have the mask selected, and if I draw over the sky, I can keep the sky darker while maintaining the tonal changes on the mountains. So you can see it here in the mask. I hide the adjustment on the sky and I only use it on the bottom part of the image. That's quite useful, but we can also use a gradient. So let me just press Command Backspace to fill the mask in with white, because that's my background color. Command or Control Backspace fills with the background color always. Let me use the gradient, and with the gradient I can click and drag from top down, and that will add a nice gradual adjustment or mask to this adjustment layer. If I shift click on the mask, we can see before and after. And I think that works really well. So it's not enough to know that you can use adjustment layers, but they always come together with a mask and blend modes. So once you set something up with your adjustment, you can always finalize it by using blend modes and pixel or vector masks. So once again, let's have a look at before and after. That was before, and this is after. And just a couple of final notes about the curves adjustment. We have this pencil here with which you can draw over a curve. So instead of putting down points, you can draw a curve. Once it's selected, I just show you, if I draw over the curve, I can always smooth the curve values by clicking on this. So if you prefer to use this, you can, but I will stick to editing points instead of using the pencil. Also, another option is the auto, which I rarely use, but it's here. You can try it, and it will automatically create a curve for you and try to color correct the image as well. And if you want to dive deeper into the curves options, go to the menu, the panel menu, and go for curves display options, because here you will be able to set other things as well. What would you like to be visible in the curves dialog box, and also the way the sliders work. So they can be reversed by setting it to ink percentage. That's actually the way CMYK mode works. But it's better to keep it in light for RGB images, I think. So I hope you learned some useful things about the curves adjustment, and you are going to be more confident in using it in the future. Thanks a lot for your attention, and see you next time.